predominantly, but as I mentioned, please at any point in time, unmute yourself and take part in this open dialogue. Okay, Andrea, is that good for you to go?
Good intro. So welcome to everyone who's put some time aside to join us today. In the session, I'd like to draw your attention specifically to how the symptoms of dyslexia can affect the test administration process, and then also to see whether or what the considerations are to mitigate the effect of these symptoms. I'm by no means an expert on the subject, so please feel free to comment or add anything that you found works in the process or that doesn't work, or any comments that you might have. We are here, like Jani said, to facilitate a conversation. So that said, let's start. Okay, so on the agenda today, we see that we're going to have a quick look at neurodiversity, the prevalence rates thereof, both locally and internationally. Then what is dyslexia and how it impacts the test administration process? What are some of the accommodations that we can offer? What are the benefits of employing neurodiverse talent? What are some common misconceptions about neurodiversity? What do some of our professional guidelines say? And then just a quick summary. Okay. I see that there are still people waiting to be admitted, so I'm just going to admit them. Okay. Then, okay, neurodiversity. So dyslexia. Sorry,
I think he's asked whether have you got slides, or is it going to be just an open?
No, I do. Do you not see my slides?
No. We were looking at you, and you sounded very confident in the structure that we're going to be following. So no, it would be great to look at the slides as well.
See them. Yes, I put so much effort into the slides. Okay, hang on. Let's quickly do this.
Thank you, Andrea. For those of you who joined afterwards, just again to mention, please unmute yourself at any point in time. Andrea just took us through the agenda for today, which I think she did a lot of work. And she's actually, even though she's been saying that she's not an expert, she's got first-hand experience with this for many years. And she's been presenting at conference. Well, she's compiled all the literature for conference presentations to be done. So she definitely knows a lot about the topic, but it would really be good for us to just hear from the rest of you as to, you know, any learnings, any insights, any experience that you have on the topic as well. But Andrea, we still can't see slides. I just wanted to.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Let's see. Let's try a different way. Let's just see if I share my screen just like that and not the presentation. Okay. There we go. Is
yes,
that better? Can you start seeing it now?
Yes, we can see. That's much better. Thank you so much.
Okay, there we go. So the agenda, as Jani mentioned. Okay, moving on from there. Then dyslexia falls under the umbrella term of neurodiversity. And neurodiversity includes an array of neurodevelopmental conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, ADHD and ADD, dysgraphia, developmental coordination disorder, also previously known as dyspraxia. It also includes your dyscalculia and then also Tourette syndrome. So while some neurodiverse individuals may face challenges, it should really never be seen as a disability, but rather that it acknowledges the inherent value and potential within each neurotype. Neurodiversity also refers to the idea that human cognition actually lives on a spectrum and that there is no single right way for the brain to operate. And due to their neurobiological wiring, neurodiverse people differ in how they think, learn, process information, and then also interact with the world around them. The neurodiversity movement is changing the narrative from focusing on deficits to understanding how various brains work differently, and then fostering a more inclusive and understanding environment. Right? Each neurodiverse person experiences their cognition or their condition differently. And generally, each neurodiverse condition brings with it its own set of strengths and weaknesses. When being assessed, these individuals often bring their own, like I said, strengths and weaknesses, and they often present with what's called a spiky profile. So if we look at the slide, we see that a spiky profile is a graph that visually represents the strengths and weaknesses of the individual. So here, if we have a look, we see something like writing speed, expressive vocabulary, passage comprehension, and visual processing speed is a strength for this individual. It's not to say that every dyslexic spiky profile looks like this. It's just an example. And then something like spelling, working memory, letter naming, and then reading fluency is a real challenge for this individual. So spiky profiles help us to identify areas where the neurodivergent individual then has a strength, and then also where a challenge is. So the peaks is the strength and the valley is the challenge. And everyone has strengths and weaknesses, but for neurodiverse individuals, the difference between a skill area, so the peak, and then the developmental area, which is then your valley, is much more pronounced. Hence, it's a spiky appearance of the graph. And these graphs help us to recognize strengths, to understand the challenges, and then also to create tailored approaches. Okay. Then, if we look at the prevalence rates of neurodiversity, it's estimated that between 15 and 20% of the world's population has some kind of neurodiverse condition. Therefore, there is a strong possibility that individuals within a job or in a pool of job applicants at any given time are neuroatypical. And because of this, in as much as it's possible, it should be ensured that the selection process, including the administration of assessments, does not discriminate unfairly against this cohort. The precise prevalence rates are hard to find, specifically in the South African context, but various studies provide an idea of estimates. Okay, so if we have a look, we see that for ADHD in South Africa, they diagnose between 2.5 and 4.3% of the population. For autism spectrum disorder, it's 1 to 2% of the population. Dyslexia, they say 3 to 7%, but up to as much as 20% of the population can display some kind of dyslexic symptom. DCD, dyspraxia, between 5 and 6%. Dyscalculia, between 6 and 8%. For dysgraphia and Tourette syndrome, it's difficult to find a reliable source. But if we look at the worldwide prevalence, we see that for dysgraphia, it's 5 to 20% of the population. For Tourette syndrome, worldwide, it's less than 1%. The other global prevalence rates for ADHD, autism, dyslexia, and then DCD, as well as dyscalculia, largely reflect what we see in South Africa. So I don't know if that's comforting or not, but we are within what the global prevalence rates are. Okay. Then, yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but I think what is also so important to note is, on the one hand, those are the percentages that's been diagnosed, but I think that I would be very curious to know the massive amount of people who actually operates relatively effectively, but that's just not ever had the luxury to be going to somebody who are able to pick up on any diagnosis, or just never, may have not been as severe, or may have had support, but that they would have possibly also fall within the diagnosable, category, but it's just never been diagnosed officially. So, but yes, it's still alarming, the large percentage of people who would fall within the neurodiversity realm.
It is, yes. So from the above estimates, it seems that dyslexia is probably the most diagnosed condition, both in South Africa and globally, which may mean that there is more than likely someone with dyslexia in any given talent pool. So to understand how dyslexia can impact the results obtained in an assessment and how we can accommodate people with dyslexia, we must first have a look at the various challenges that dyslexia presents with. Okay, so if we look at what the definition of dyslexia is, we see that dyslexia is defined as a hereditary learning disability that primarily affects areas in the brain that process language in the forms of reading, writing, and spelling. The core challenge is identifying speech sounds, so phonics, and then learning how they relate to letters and words, or then decoding, which effectively leads to reading. In addition, dyslexic people may have trouble with working memory, processing speed, time management, and also handling stress. Okay. Then, to complicate matters further, dyslexia is seen to exist on a spectrum with various classifications. So symptoms can also vary greatly between individuals, even within the same category. So we see that the different categories of dyslexia are phonological dyslexia. This is where guys have trouble connecting sounds to letters, and then also manipulating sounds in words. Surface dyslexia is a challenge to recognize whole words or sight words. So words that we would recognize immediately without even thinking about it. They struggle to identify. So then we also have rapid naming deficit, which is the difficulty in quickly naming letters, numbers, or objects. So where we neurotypical people see, if you look at the word dyslexia, where you see a capital D, for someone with dyslexia, it's difficult for them to actually name the D, to actually bring together what the alphabetical letter D is and what the sound is that it makes. So it's a complex, it's always a thinking process that they need to go through. For us, it's automatic. For them, it's really straining. Then you also have double deficit dyslexia, which combines the difficulties in both phonological and in rapid naming skills. And then some of the other classifications is your visual dyslexia. This is where your mirroring or the reversal of letters come in. And then also you've got spatial dyslexia, which is trouble with layout and direction. And then also auditory dyslexia, where people might struggle to process spoken language. So many facets that is looked at or affected by dyslexia. So if we then look at what the impact of dyslexia on the test-taking process is, we can see that the slow and effortful decoding can significantly impact reading comprehension. So understanding what it is that you are reading is a problem. Longer time is required for them to read the questions and the answer choices, which then leads to time pressure and potential errors. Written responses may not be clear or accurate, and this might disadvantage them in tests requiring written responses. So after they've struggled to read the question, if a written response is required on an assessment, writing down the answer coherently is another struggle. So then also fine motor difficulties that's associated with that struggle also causes handwriting to be slower and more laborious, which further adds to stress and time pressure. Time tests then also places a lot of pressure on dyslexic individuals who may already struggle with decoding and also with processing information quickly. This can then lead to rushed answers and inaccurate results. Then also remembering the test instructions is challenging because they have an impaired working memory. So especially if the instructions are complex or if it's got a complex sequence to it, or if there's lots of information pieces that they need to remember simultaneously. Then dyslexia can also potentially hinder vocabulary development, making it harder to understand, again, complex test language and technical terms. And this can also disadvantage them in tests with verbal reasoning and specific knowledge assessments. So the pressure of standardized assessing or testing by itself can also exacerbate the dyslexia-related challenges, leading to anxiety and stress, which can further hinder performance. And then also if they are completing online assessments that have limited accessibility features, or if they are completing a hard copy assessment and the font is really small or there's poor contrast, so the writing isn't standing out well enough from the background on the paper, it can also further complicate the difficulties that they experience. Okay. Then it's also very important to remember that neurodiverse conditions are comorbid. So research shows that up to 40% of dyslexic people also have ADHD. And between 30 and 47%, so almost half of them, have dysgraphia. And dysgraphia affects your ability to write coherently. So then also 26% may have dyscalculia. And dyscalculia affects your ability to understand and perform mathematical tasks. So any assessment that looks at any kind of mathematical skill, even the simplest skill, becomes a tall order for someone who has dyslexia to complete. Then dyslexia can also co-occur with other speech and language disorders, which can make it challenging, like we said, Nana, to learn new vocabulary and to develop strong reading comprehension skills. It can also co-occur with executive functioning disorders, which then affects cognitive skills, such as planning, organization, time management, self-control. So these guys might be a little bit impulsive from time to time. And then lastly, it can also co-occur with anxiety and depression. So this is often diagnosed in people who have dyslexia because of the challenges that they face in school or in the working environment, and then also in social situations. So to say that neurodiversity is complex is a bit of an understatement. Okay. So taking the above into consideration, it's obvious that difficulty with written language can present significant hurdles when taking psychometric tests. And assessments most often used in the selection space are designed to assess cognitive ability, personality traits, and then also job suitability. And these assessments often rely heavily on written language and sometimes also timed tasks, all areas where dyslexic individuals face challenges. And it's vitally important to remember that dyslexia does not influence intelligence. Individuals with dyslexia or any of the neurodiverse conditions can possess very strong cognitive abilities, and they excel in areas that are not traditionally assessed by psychometric tests. Some of the areas where dyslexic people stand out would be your 3D visual thinking. They've got very strong verbal skills, and then also very good long-term memory. And by understanding the challenges and seeking proper accommodations, individuals with dyslexia can ensure as much as possible that their psychometric tests accurately reflect their true abilities and their potential. But all the professionals are, however, not always aware of the difficulties associated with each neurodiverse condition and how it can affect the assessment process. We also need to be aware of the different technology and the different accommodations available to these individuals. So then what are some of the accommodations that we can offer? So as mentioned, psychometric assessments can often present challenges for individuals with dyslexia due to their reliance on reading and writing. However, several accommodations can be made to ensure a fair and accurate assessment on their true abilities. So, and I guess this is where the guys who actually work as consultants would be best suited to say that if before the assessment process begins, it is important for the test administrator to know if the test taker has been diagnosed with dyslexia or any other condition. And informing the test administrator beforehand allows them to provide appropriate support and also ensure a fair assessment. I don't know if that's always practical. If you think of assessing a large number of candidates, I'm not sure if, number one, the candidates will even come forward to say that they've been diagnosed with any kind of neurodevelopmental disorder. It's not something that they necessarily talk about because of what may have happened or the reaction that they may have gotten previously from people that they've told the diagnosis about. I don't know if the psychometric process of sending out links to a client, asking them to complete the assessment, if it always provides the practitioner with the time to then gather information from the candidates. So I think the guys who are actually in the field will be better suited to say whether this is practically doable or not. Then also, yeah.
Sorry, just out of curiosity, because I'm typing it up now in the chat, but I can imagine that one could very easily add it to a consent form if it's not already there, to as a responsibility of the candidate to highlight. I mean, on the one hand, we've got the consent, it is pre-assessment process required. There's certain responsibilities both from the administrator and then the candidate taking the assessment. I agree, if you withhold it, you can't, if the candidate decides to withhold that information, it's one thing, it's really difficult to work with that, but at least to have an area in which it highlights if you are diagnosed with neurodiverse, or if you have any reason to believe that verbal content might be difficult, something along those lines to highlight to a administrator that there's something that need to be considered.
I think so, and that's also maybe a good place to just give an idea to the candidate what kind of accommodation we can offer, so they can maybe just tick with an X, you know, I need extra time, or I need a scribe, or I need a text-to-speech, speech-to-text kind of software assistance. So that
exactly.
you know beforehand.
Absolutely.
Right. So then also thinking of during the assessment, accommodations can include something like quiet and a distraction-free environment. Okay. So minimizing external distractions can also improve their focus and concentration during the assessment. Also, if you can, or if they say that they need something like noise cancelling earphones, maybe offer that or allow them to wear it if it's something that they wear on a regular basis anyway. Offer extended time. So often additional time can alleviate pressure and allow the individual to process information and to complete the task at their own pace. I know that I think most of the assessments are not timed. So they can take as long as they want to, but candidates don't always know that. I mean, we know that as the administrator, but this might be the first time that they've ever come into contact with a psychometric assessment. And probably just communicating and saying, you know, there's no time limit to these assessments. You can take as long as you need. I think that already alleviates quite a bit of stress from their side. Maybe offering a reader or a scribe. I'm not sure how this process would also practically work. It's more from what I can see, in an environment where you would probably do hard copy assessments. Not necessarily if you're doing online assessments. Also, just be aware that it has to be a trained reader and a scribe. It can't be the person's mom or uncle or aunt who reads the questions, because that then brings into question the results of the individual, because you never know if the reader then tries to assist. So yeah, a trained person that needs to read the questions aloud, and a scribe that can write down answers that are dictated by the individual. This eliminates the reading barrier and focuses on the cognitive abilities of the individual. Maybe also offering alternative test formats. So this is also where you can offer the assessment in like an audio recording. This might be better than a reader, or maybe enlarged print that can be offered if you are working with hard copy assessments. And then also allowing short breaks at regular intervals can help maintain focus and reduce fatigue. So especially if you think of the 40% of people who have dyslexia and ADHD, it's already difficult to process information. And then coupled with ADHD, sitting for long periods, having to concentrate, having to answer various questions, I think it can be very strenuous. So asking them, you know, what are frequent breaks for them, not what's a frequent break for me, because my frequent break might be every 45 minutes, theirs might be every 10 minutes. So asking them what works for them. Then also any assistive technology. So using a specific text-to-speech software like ReachDeck is something that I found online, or then spell check, something like Grammarly is available. That can minimize the impact of dyslexia on reading and writing tasks, and then also using dyslexia-friendly fonts. So something like Open Dyslexic, which is a font that you can download for free. You'll see on the slide, there's a screen grab of what the font looks like. So this was specifically created for dyslexic people to read easier. So there's better spacing between the letters, and then there's font weight. So you'll see the bottom of each letter seems like it's a little bit more pronounced. That apparently assists. Then also color filters or overlays. These can also be downloaded for free from the same place as Open Dyslexic. So often just changing the white paper, changing it to something like blue or purple, can assist greatly in just reading what's written on the paper. So not everybody uses overlays, not everybody uses the same color overlay. So just be aware of that. And then if it's possible and practical in practice out there, reviewing the assessment results with the individual and then considering the impact of dyslexia on the specific tasks can also provide more accurate insights into their overall ability. So it's not the feedback I think that we are used to giving. It's more just a post-assessment kind of talk about, you know, what do you think the accommodation may have created or assisted, and then what do you think your dyslexia may have impacted on? Again, I'm not the person who does assessment, so I'm not entirely sure which of these are feasible, which of these can be done. It's more for the consultant guys out there to say whether, you know, this will work, or where do you find this, or, you know, that kind of thing.
Maybe just to comment, so Shani, I think you said in the chat as well, you know, it's one thing when you've got a supervised administration happening, it's another if it's large volumes and you need to try and accommodate people in this manner. And I mean, I absolutely agree that would go, I mean, that would be the same for any anything that might affect performance on assessment, you know, assessments, performance in general. And I think that is also why it is so important. Sorry, I've put our kids in the room. That is also why it is so important that I think if you could identify or at least capture pre-assessment to try and accommodate those individuals, I think would be best. Again, not easy. And I think even while the assessment is happening, again, it's really difficult to solve, and we definitely don't have the answers yet, but I think it is worth solving or trying to solve to some extent. Just want to double check before we move on, Andrea, is there anybody in the room that has done something or have found that some sort of accommodation has either worked or not? Not at this point. Think about it, Bill. Yeah, add it to the chat.
Okay. Then just in terms of accommodations, it's also just important to remember that not all accommodations will be suitable for every individual or for every assessment. And therefore, collaboration and open communication are key to ensuring a fair and accurate assessment experience for people with dyslexia. So you don't have to have the dyslexic, open dyslexic font and the overlays and extra time and this and that. It's between the consultant being able to communicate with the candidate to hear what would work best for them in which situation. Okay, then looking at the benefits of employing neurodiverse talent. So not only do people with dyslexia bring certain strengths to the workplace, but employing neurodiverse talent benefits the company in more ways. Some of these would be enhanced creativity and innovation. So neurodiverse individuals often approach problems from a more unique angle, and they possess strong problem-solving abilities, leading to fresh perspectives and innovative solutions. And then also in recent decades, the ability to compete based on innovation has become more crucial for many companies. So really an important facet. Then improved accuracy to attention and detail. So studies have shown that individuals with certain neurodiversities, such as autism, may excel at tasks requiring meticulous attention to detail and data analysis, thus minimizing any kind of error. Then they also often have a stronger work ethic and loyalty to the company. Research there suggests that neurodiverse employees often demonstrate higher levels of engagement, dedication, and loyalty to their employers. Having a diverse and inclusive work environment, companies create a more inclusive and welcoming work environment for all employees, which then fosters a sense of belonging and improving overall morale. Also then accessing a wider talent pool. So recruiting from a broader pool of talent allows companies to tap into a larger pool of qualified individuals, potentially leading to the discovery of top performance who might have otherwise been overlooked. And then also enhancing brand image, funnily enough. Companies that actively embrace and support neurodiversity can then cultivate a positive brand image, and they attract both diverse talent and also customers who value inclusivity. Okay. Then an increasing number of companies are realizing that employing people with neurodiverse conditions bring with them unique skills and perspectives to business, like the ones we just mentioned. And the IT industry seems to be a great fit for neurodiverse people, especially areas such as data analytics, software testing, business analytics, and cybersecurity, whose tasks are a good match with the abilities of some neurodiverse people. So companies like Microsoft, Deloitte, IBM, and Dell Technologies have all reformed their HR processes to access the neurodiverse talent. And Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, they have a neurodiverse program. And over the past few years, they've placed about 30 people in software testing roles in their Australia Department of Human Services. And then also preliminary results suggest that the neurodiverse team that they've placed is about 30% more productive than the neurotypical team. So that's something to think about. But then benefits specific to dyslexia. Dyslexic people are often seen as the game changers. They are the guys that would disrupt industries. They would provide solutions to problems that we didn't know we even had. And they also come with strong visual and spatial skills. So people with dyslexia often excel in something like visual and spatial reasoning, which can be valuable in roles such as engineering, design, and architecture. They also have creative problem-solving skills. So due to their unique approach to information processing, dyslexic individuals can be highly creative problem solvers. They may think outside the box and come up with innovative solutions that others may miss. They also have a strong determination and resilience. So having to overcome the challenges related to dyslexia can foster a strong sense of determination and resilience in these individuals. They may be highly motivated to succeed and also possess a strong work ethic. They also often come with quite strong communication and interpersonal skills. So dyslexic individuals develop strong communication skills, both written and verbal, due to their experience in overcoming challenges in this area. They may also be highly empathetic and understanding due to their own experiences with facing all kinds of difficulties related to dyslexia. Okay. Then looking at some of the misconceptions about neurodiversity. So despite all of the above benefits of employing neurodiverse talent, there still remains many misconceptions about the neurodiverse population. So research from the Leadership and Management Institute has revealed that about 50% of leaders and managers who participated in a survey would not employ a neurodiverse person, despite an estimated 1 in 7 people being neurodiverse. So various reasons for this was a lack of understanding of neurodiversity, a misperception that neurodiverse people require more supervision, also a misperception that they cannot work independently, and then a misperception that they are less capable and will then cost the company more. Other findings from the study also indicated that dyscalculia is the least understood of all the neurodiverse conditions. The most negative impressions were about people who have ADHD, ADD, or the Tourette syndrome. The most well-known and least discriminated against is dyslexia. They often found that policies and procedures rarely address neurodiversity, and only about 20% of companies provide training to their employees to understand neurodiversity. So I think the training of the employees in companies is very important. Having them understand something like dyslexia, what is dyslexia, what it affects, what does it not affect, and what it isn't, is quite important to counter the misperceptions that people might have. And then to do this for all the neurodiversities out there. So from the study, it seems clear that there are significant levels of subconscious bias against the neurodiverse population, as well as misunderstanding of their potential, and then that they can be a valuable human resource. Okay, then if we look at some of the professional guidelines, it's by no means a complete list. The APA recognizes the importance of appropriate assessment for individuals with dyslexia, and they've published some guidelines to ensure accurate and fair evaluations. And then some key points from the APA regarding dyslexia is then to use appropriate accommodation like extended time or alternative test formats. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. To also utilize informal assessments like observations, interviews, and maybe work samples to capture broader abilities. Again, I don't know if that's always possible in the whole testing process, but that's what they recommend. Provide necessary accommodation, again, like text-to-speech software, scribe services, or breaks to eliminate barriers and assess true ability. And then also, if you interpret the assessments, maybe to do that with a bit of caution, taking into consideration the strengths and weaknesses, the potential impact of the accommodation, and then also the influence that dyslexia may have had on specific tasks. Okay. The ITC then has Chapter 10 of their guidelines for technology-based assessment, and that focuses more on fairness and accessibility in testing. So accessibility is different to what accommodations are, and the Chapter 10 explains it to the nth degree. So accessibility means ensuring that all test takers, not just guys with neurodiverse conditions, can demonstrate their abilities without being disadvantaged by the testing format itself. So the chapter defines accessibility as a key component throughout the test development process, aiming to remove barriers that could prevent accurate measurement of a specific skill or knowledge. So traditionally, accommodations are offered to individuals with disabilities, but this chapter 10 recommends a broader accessibility features to minimize irrelevant challenges for all test takers, including those unfamiliar with technology, if you are a second language speaker, and then also older adults who might not be as au fait with the technology that's being used. The chapter also outlines 4 main categories of accessibility during test administration. And these are then to ensure that the test content is accessible to all users, regardless of their abilities. It is allowing users to interact with the test content in various ways. So whether your input is via keyboard, or whether it's via mouse or any assistive technology. Then also enabling users to respond to test questions in different ways. So either by typing an answer or by speaking an answer, so then using speech to text, or then using a scribe where possible. And then also lastly, making sure that the test platform is easy to navigate, and that it includes most assistive technologies. And then finally, the chapter offers practical recommendations for ensuring accessibility. So making sure that all aspects of the testing process is accessible, clearly communicating available accommodations, and then ensuring that the test platform works with various assistive technologies, as we've just mentioned. Then, a short summary. Dyslexia, like all the other neurodiverse conditions, is terribly complex, and each individual experiences their dyslexia differently, bringing their own set of skills and talents to the workplace. It's our responsibility to ensure that we treat them as fairly as possible during the selection process by understanding their condition as best we can, the challenges that it brings, and the accessibility and accommodations that they require to display their true potential. And as an increasing number of employers become aware of the benefits of employing neurodiverse individuals, test administrators will face an increase in the number of requests for the assessment of this population. And it's not a cohort that industrial psychologists and psychometrists are necessarily familiar with. But we must understand the impact and the needs of these individuals to allow for a fair assessment process. And then just as a side note, in reading about all of this, I saw that there is an upcoming neurodiversity in the workplace conference in March. This is the link. The company is Neurodiversity in the Workplace. So if you find them on LinkedIn, they actually advertise the upcoming conference, and it is hosted by Dell Technologies, one of the forerunners in employing neurodiverse individuals. That's just the riveting references. And then that's my story. Any questions, any comments, anything that was unclear? Please tell us where you think what will work, what won't work, what can we improve on as a test publisher. Anything.
I asked the question now in the chat, and I was wondering whether anybody's got, again, I'm asking it because I don't know the answer. If a candidate goes through a selection process, let's say for argument's sake, it's a consultant running it for a mining company, and afterwards, after the assessment process is done, the candidate feels as if that he or she wasn't able to perform adequately or show their ability due to their diagnosis, and that they didn't feel like there were any accommodations made, or even a chance for him or her to be able to at least perform according to what they believe they can do. Where do they go as a candidate? Meaning, what are their rights? Where do they complain? Is it I said in the chat, is it a CCMA complaint? Is it let's say there's no unions that they can go through. Do they go to and who's liable? Meaning, is it the professional who ran the selection process for the company, or is it the company that needs to take responsibility for it? I just want to understand what that would look like. Does anybody know or have thoughts around it?
I don't necessarily know, but I have some thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think obviously the process needs to be, as I mentioned in the chat earlier, I mean, obviously one asks in a consent form whether people, you know, if there's any reason that they cannot perform, that they must, you know, make you aware of it. Now, of course, if it's an online process only and the person is struggling to read, I mean, where does that leave us? But be that as it may, if the person doesn't make that information available, then I don't think it's a case of who is liable, because if one doesn't know about it, you cannot manage it, firstly. But definitely, let's say if someone feels after the fact that they, because of this, they weren't able to perform their best, and depending on the organization and whether they have proper, let's say if it's a small company who maybe don't have a proper, let's call it HR structure, versus a bigger organization who has a proper HR structure. Of course, a candidate can appeal to the CCMA or go to the CCMA, for example, as an option. But what then would typically happen is that it would be a case of before it gets there, that there is a process of conciliation, etc., where the HR would typically be involved. So yes, it's such a tricky one, because if someone doesn't want to admit that because they are afraid that it may actually count against them, then in this case, it did count against them potentially. So what do they do? So yeah, it is a tricky one, but I think we must ask the questions if there's pros and cons to online assessment, and obviously if you didn't ask the person yourself, you wouldn't know, and if they don't give the information, you also won't know. So yeah.
And to your point, I mean, there's so many scenarios that one can come across, and it's difficult to answer. There's no recipe for everything, but to some extent, I've definitely had people, especially when you still had paper and pencil, where we ask the consent, is there anything that will affect your performance? And at that point in time, prior to the assessments, not knowing exactly what the assessments will feel like, you know, afterwards, I have had somebody saying that, yes, see, my grand actually passed away. We're on our way to her funeral. I didn't think of it prior, but now that I actually assessed or was assessed on, assessed on the EQ, I'm not sure if it may affect. And the same would go for any person's diagnosis as well. On the one hand, the question is often put quite broad, and you're not 100% sure what you're agreeing or not agreeing, for prior to the assessment starting. And then on the one hand, one can say, is it the candidate's responsibility to try and sort it out as to, they experienced it to be uncomfortable and not what they wanted the experience to be? What's the process? Or do we as consultants, saying for myself as well, actually put the process in place for them to say, if afterwards you feel A, B, and C, please take this step, then that step, and this step, so that we can resolve that feeling.
But I think back to that, Jani, I mean, the process, whether it's an external person running the process, or whether it is then internally driven by the HR department is really that the communication around it and that the support that is available to people who do assessments must be in place, meaning that they can either push a button to say, look, I need support, or I'm unsure. They know who so that they need to know who they can contact. And then the onus is on them to speak up,
Yes.
because otherwise
Absolutely.
you
No,
won't.
no, no, absolutely. No, absolutely. But I know for myself, I often don't have that post-assessment, that button, or that afterwards, just, are you okay? Are you happy? Can we go on with the process type of feedback, which is quite cool.
So one of the things that we do, for example, is that any and every candidate will, after an assessment process, get an opportunity. Now, again, you can say, well, if the person can't read or struggle to read, what do you do then? But they asked whether they were, is there anything that was an issue? Were they, do they need any further support, or whatever the case may be? So there is that opportunity. But yeah, it is, I think definitely one can be creative, I suppose, about how do you, as the whole world is actually becoming and creating awareness around neurodiversity, etc. How do we also make sure that we allow for that more easily without people feeling, put on the spot or placed on the spot? Do we know what any of the, I'm just thinking, so for example, if we think about the EQ or something like that as an assessment, what a company like MHS, what their views is on that, because they also do work in this space a lot. I wonder if they have any views, or whether they ask those questions for neurodiverse people.
Yeah. I think one big thing, and I think I'm not sure who said it in the chat, but one big thing that we do see with many of these international suppliers would be that they do allow software to be installed for the either reading ability, to at least have audio connected to some of the items, etc. So whether it's visual impairment, or whether it might be related to a more dyslexia type of thing. But I think that is, and to Keiz's point earlier, as well, would be if you at least have, we can't start with accommodating every single version of every single neurodiverse individual, but at least have one or two or three. But it is something that we can ask more about, Renata, just to see if there's anything other than the software being made use of. The text, for example, that Andrea, you highlighted here, I've not seen specific text, and it would be amazing to actually have that being accommodated into our instructions as an option, just to have even content, information shared, etc. So I do see some of the chats coming through as well. Is there anybody that'd like to unmute or ask or mention?
I think just to Noko's comment there, would it then be advisable to have those conversations with the candidate? It goes back exactly to, yes, to what we said, the process. So what is the process, a standard process for you as a consultant, or for the organization that you are working for, in terms of how are people made aware of the assessments that they need to do? Do they know what their rights are before, they do it? That it's communicated, in terms of, what they can and can't, and whatever the case may be. So absolutely, I think it needs to be part of a standard process. And then typically it would be a consent form or whatever that goes with that. But then you may lose out on some of the nuances. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else that would like to comment, or is currently doing certain things, or have come across a certain practice that either works or doesn't? I ever believe that this has been very insightful. And I think the more we create awareness around or knowledge around this, because it's easy to some extent ignore this as a neurodiversity as a topic, but it's tough to try and solve the problem. And I think this is the intention of today's conversation as well. This is the starting point. How do we solve it without necessarily devaluing the assessment process? Because again, we don't want to go beyond a certain point where the assessment doesn't differentiate between high and low performers at the end of the day. And it is to find that sweet balance. So I think if there's anybody out there that would like to add some more to this conversation, please reach out to us. Andrea, I think it's great to be making this available and the content available, possibly as a blog post as well. And then furthermore to have the recording made available. But just appreciate everybody attending. And Andrea, thank you so much for your effort in putting this together. I know you position yourself not being an expert, but you do have first-hand experience with these things. And I think you are much more of an expert than any of us. So I think this brings us to an end. Andrea, anything else that you would like to add?
No, nothing from my side. I think it's a complex topic, and I think trying to not solve it, but trying to mitigate the effects of the neurodiverse population is going to be complex. And we need to talk about it and be aware of it and see what works, what doesn't work. And take it from there. But thank you to everyone who joined in. Thank you for the questions, the comments. We appreciate it. And then if there's nothing else, we'll see you again at the next session.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, everybody else. Thanks, Renata, and everybody contributing as well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.